Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and very welcome to the Going Green conference organized by the EU delegation in Washington, D.C. My name is Caroline Vicini. I'm the deputy head of delegation, and I will be the conferencier today. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ambassador David O'Sullivan from the EU delegation. Please, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to say a few words of introduction at this conference on behalf of the EU delegation, and we're very grateful that so many of you have turned up today for this important event and what we hope will be a very useful and productive conference. Some 5 months ago, Paris suffered, as we all know, tragic attacks that touched the hearts of so many, and we were extremely grateful for the very strong sense of solidarity here in the United States with what happened there. But these events could not dim the enthusiasm of the City of Lights, and a mere 3 weeks later, as we now know, the world's leaders came together and unified to strike a historic deal for the planet. And there was indeed one of the most important moments in the battle against climate change in the results of Paris. But as we all know, this was not the end, but rather the beginning, a new beginning, a new departure, and the momentum cannot stop with simply reaching the conclusions in Paris. And just 2 weeks ago, the world's leaders convened once more in New York to sign the Paris Agreement, demonstrating, if anyone still doubted, that the achievement in Paris was not just a fleeting moment of international cooperation, but that it was something much deeper and much more enduring. It's the expression of a shared determination to do something about one of the greatest and most urgent challenges of our time, the threat of climate change. We fought hard to negotiate an ambitious deal, and I think the partnership between the European Union and the United States showed unprecedented joint leadership in achieving this, and we've celebrated each signature that followed. And now it is the time to act and to turn that commitment of our ambition into reality. As Commissioner Miguel Arias Cañete said in New York, we must bottle this Paris spirit and take it everywhere we go. And that is what we're doing today, to propagate it and use it to breathe new energy into climate action. And this week, representatives of the world come together and descend on Washington to share their expertise at the numerous climate-related events taking place across the city. It's with great pride that I'm the Going Green Delivering on Paris conference, which is the contribution of the European delegation and of the European Union to this reflection. And I welcome such a great group of speakers that will help steer us along the path to achieve our objective of reducing global temperatures by more than 2 degrees. I'd like to welcome both Commissioner Cañete and the newly appointed US Envoy for Climate Change, Jonathan Pershing, two champions of climate action who have contributed significantly towards advancing this agenda on the world stage. I would also like to recognize and pay tribute to the work of the former Special Envoy, Todd Stern, and I'd like very much to welcome the Dutch Minister Dijksma of the Dutch Presidency of the Council of the European Union, who is joining us also today. And I'm sure they will contribute to how we can take forward transatlantic cooperation as a driver and an engine to make the mechanics of the Paris Agreement a reality. Later this morning, we'll be joined by European Commission Vice President for the Energy Union, Mario Šefčovič, and Secretary for Energy, Ernest Moniz. The Vice President and the Secretary embody the position and the responsibility of the EU and the US as leading technology players, with the clear message that we will seize this opportunity of bringing the greatest minds of science, innovation, and entrepreneurship to deliver on the promise of Paris and to accelerate the transition towards low-carbon societies. Sadly, I don't have the floor for long enough, and I wouldn't wish to do so, to introduce and thank every speaker that will address you today, the city mayors, businessmen and women, policy shapers, climate advocates, all that play a leading role in their respective fields and from their respective offices in the fight against global warming. Their action and their work is testimony that the battle against climate change is being actively engaged. We need everyone's ingenuity and imagination, and perhaps a little bit of finance along the way to help us win. The discussion and debate will, I hope, be intense and thought-provoking. Thank you again to all our speakers and this great opportunity to share experience, knowledge, and ideas that are necessary to make the path towards a climate-neutral future irreversible. Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to a very interesting conference.
So now we have our opening keynote addresses. May I ask Commissioner Cañete to take the podium?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be back in the United States with all of you, just a couple of weeks after the signing ceremony of the Paris Agreement, where a record-breaking 175 countries signed the agreement, including the European Union and its 28 member states. I was proud for the commitment Europe demonstrated and honored to have been in the ceremony representing with the Dutch Minister of the European Union. Let me also say how happy I was to see the active engagement and determination from the United States to get the deal done in Paris. You have no idea how many times Torsten and I met, talk over the phone, exchange emails, to come to a solid level of understanding and ambition that could not be revoked. I suppose Jonathan that will follow the same way because it was a good way forward. Today, I will walk you through three main aspects of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. First, European Union's climate policy in the post-2021 era. Second, clean technologies and responsible energy as the enablers for the green economy. And third, the challenges ahead and the pending issues this year. Now that we have the agreement, we need to ratify it and we need to fully implement it in the form of policies and measures. I applaud the United States' intention to ratify the agreement as early as this year and not let any administrative delays get in the way. The European Union will do it as soon as possible, even we have 29 parliaments that will have a say in this, so it may take some time. But let me assure you, it will be complete as soon as possible, and it will guarantee that when we act, we will do so on a very solid legal basis. We are ready to set the wheels in motion. Before the summer, the European Commission will present a proposal to our member states to ratify the Paris Agreement on behalf of the European Union. More crucially important than the ratification is the full implementation of our commitments. Here, the European Union is already working on legislation to implement its ambition to cut domestic greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Last year, we proposed legislation to strengthen our common market and bring it in line with the European Union 2030 climate target. And before the summer, I will propose legislation that will set the national greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for the 28 member states for the sectors outside our common market, mainly transport, buildings, and agriculture. Every year we are also actively, growing our share of renewable energy, redesigning our electricity market, and becoming more energy efficiency, and we will present legislation on all these three topics, along with new CO2 targets for cars and light vans. And we will produce a solid mid-century low greenhouse gas emission strategy by 2020. In all, we have to go through far-reaching changes in our energy system. This is why I now want to talk to you about clean tech and responsible energy as enablers of the transition to green economy. Climate technologies have an essential role to play in avoiding dangerous climate change. As well as helping to reduce emissions and adapt to the adverse effects of climate change, these technologies have also contributed to job creation and sustainable economic growth in Europe and across the globe. Today, the environmental goods and services sector provides jobs for more than 4 million people in Europe, and our 2030 climate and energy target could create a further 700,000 jobs, and if we raise our ambition further on renewable and energy efficiency, this could reach 1.2 million. Europe is home to cutting-edge technologies in the world. Every year, we export 35 billion euros worth of renewable equipment. Some 40% of the world wind turbines are built by European companies. And our companies lead the world in the number of patents for renewable technologies, with more than 40% coming from Europe. But we want to go further, and that's why We have set ourselves short and mid-term targets of a 20% renewables in our energy system by 2020 and 27% by 2030. If we are going to succeed, we will need to be ready with the next generation of renewable technologies and energy storage system. We will need new grid management technologies that are fit for renewables and can transport power more efficiently. And we will need intelligent transport solutions to meet our 2020 target of having 10% of transport fuel of every European Union country come from renewable sources, such as biofuels. So we will need that Europe remains a destination for world-class researchers and that we provide the right support to get their innovation to market. And this is why we have initiatives such as Horizon 2020, the biggest European Union research and innovation program ever, with some 80 billion euros available between 2014 and 2020, and at least 35% of this is ring-fenced for climate-related research. Our aim is to leverage as much private investment as possible, and this is also the thinking before both the new 315 billion euros European Fund for Strategic Investments and the NER 300 Low Carbon Technology Demonstration Program, one of the world's largest funding programs for innovative low-carbon energy demonstration projects, funded from the sale of emissions allowances from the European Union emission trading system. On top of this, our policies such as CO2 standards for cars and eco-design, as well as eco and energy labeling schemes, are also driving technology innovation. Let me finish about the most immediate challenge we are going to be facing in the next months with regard to other important sources of emissions, such as aviation and AFCs. Emissions from international aviation account for more than 2% of global emissions, higher than the emissions of some European Union member states, and these emissions are growing very fast and could triple by 2050, undermining mitigation efforts in other sectors. In September 2016, the International Civil Aviation Organization Assembly will meet to hopefully agree a global market-based measure aiming at stabilizing international aviation emissions at 2020 level. This will be a crucial step towards stabilizing aviation emissions from 2020, and it will be one of the first concrete climate milestones after COP21. While we have commitments to reduce CO2 emissions, we should not forget that our overall commitment is to reduce temperature rise. And there are other substances that further accelerate climate change, HFCs. A global reduction in the use of HFCs will constitute a clear step forward in the fight against climate change. It's a quick and cost-effective way of getting on track with ambitious goals we set ourselves in Paris. And this is why the European Union is committed to working towards the adoption of an amendment to the Montreal Protocol this year. Ladies and gentlemen, COP22 will also be a challenge because we have to maintain the spirit of Paris. It is not an ordinary COP. It's a COP in which we have to maintain the particular momentum of Paris, and which there is a scope to do action in many areas. We have to concentrate in implementation and action. We will have to focus on pre-2020 actions and mission implementation, including capacity building as well as local limits. And there are areas like transparency and accounting rules and ambition mechanisms in which some work has to be developed to prepare and complete the roadmap that we established in Paris. The May EUintheUS session in Bonn will be extremely important in this endeavor. Finally, with the Paris Agreement, we have sent a clear message to the international community, business owners and civil society, that the transformation of our economy into one is carbon neutral is the new reality. Now we have to make good progress toward this transformation through advance in clean technology and clean energy. Let's not be complacent. This is a long and challenging race. It is time to accelerate. It is time to take difficult decisions, set higher targets, make new laws, and redirect investments. I wish you all excellent and fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And we continue with the Dutch Minister for Environment, Sharon Dijksma. As you all know, in Europe, we still have a system with one member state holding the presidency, and this 6 months it's the Netherlands. So we are particularly happy to have the minister here. Please come forward.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Miguel, for your inspiring words. And I'd also like to thank the organizers of this event for the opportunity to speak to you here, as has been said, in my capacity of chair of the Environment Council. Ladies and gentlemen, like Commissioner Cañete, I call on all the countries that signed the historic agreement in Paris to use the momentum it created and take the bull by the horns. We've done enough talking. It's really time to start walking. The EU and the Netherlands worked hard in Paris to make the agreement something that all 195 countries would want to take part in. In other words, an agreement that takes account of national circumstances. And I believe we succeeded in that, and thus contributed to the success of the Paris Summit. What's important now is that we don't sit back and relax until the Paris Agreement loses its shiny newness. We have to turn big ideas into big action. So I would like to tell you a little story about a boy who is called Boyan Slat. Some of you may have heard of him. Boyan Slat, just 21 years old, is a Dutch inventor and entrepreneur. Boyan came up with an innovative method to clean up the plastic soup in our oceans. People have been alarmed about all the plastic waste floating in the oceans for years now. It threatens marine life and human health, as well as the livelihoods of fishermen. When Boyan first laid out his plans, people said he was a dreamer, that he wasn't being realistic, that his plans were impossible or just plain unaffordable. Undeterred, he raised millions of dollars and recruited thousands of volunteers to develop his idea. And along the way, Boyan also won the Champions of the Earth Award from the United Nations Environment Programme. And this year, his invention will be tested for the first time off the Dutch coast. Important is that this young man holds up a mirror to us, politicians, decision makers, multinationals, and so on. If we can combine human inventiveness and creativity with political decisiveness, we will be able to control one of the biggest challenges of our times, climate change. And that will mean achieving net zero emissions this century. This will require a fundamental shift in technology, energy, the economy, finance, and ultimately society as a whole. To drive this transition, innovative and powerful measures will be needed in all parts of the world. And in the Netherlands, I have to say, we started. In the Netherlands, from 2025, all new public transport buses will be zero-emission vehicles. So there the transformation starts. And it needs to turn the world, I hope. Last month, I met with my EU colleagues to discuss opportunities for climate action under ICAO and IMO. And we need to agree a global mechanism for aviation in ICAO this fall. IMO is also doing important work collecting data on shipping emissions. Another key opportunity for climate action this year, and the Commissioner already mentioned it, is phasing out of HFC's emissions under the Montreal Protocol. In terms of mitigation, it's an easy win. Alternatives are available for most users, and the climate benefits of avoiding HFC emissions are really obvious. And by addressing emissions in these sectors, we can demonstrate progress in the joint implementation of the Paris Agreement. We need to do everything we can to work towards zero emissions, especially where this can be done at limited cost. The big difference compared to some years ago, and I hope you all feel the same, is that most nations, businesses, cities and individuals are aware not only of the challenge, but also of the opportunities this transition offers. Clean energy, smart and green transport, adaptation, climate-smart agriculture, all hold great benefits for individuals, communities, and businesses. Many countries recognize the role of carbon pricing in developing cost-effective climate policies. And thanks to emissions trading, we're already reducing emissions in Europe. And we're using our experience to help develop similar schemes in other countries. When applied on a global scale, carbon pricing can drive the worldwide transition to a sustainable economy that stimulates innovation and operates on a level playing field. Achieving the ambitious targets of the Paris Agreement will not be easy. But oh boy, I'm so optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And we will now continue with a brand new US Special Envoy for Climate Change, who was nominated just the other day, Jonathan Pershing, and I hope and think that is one of your first public appearances. So we are very flattered and very happy to have you here. So welcome up, Mr. Pershing.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to be here in such good company. The Commissioner, the Minister. I think one of the things that has been very appealing in taking on this portfolio is the chance to again work with colleagues, many of whom I've known for a long time, and where I think we can get a great deal done. In some ways, this is a very interesting point in time to take this portfolio. I think we've seen, in some sense, the end of one era, the era of a negotiation, and the beginning of a new era, the era of implementation. And if we think about the structure and the elements and the kinds of dynamics that are involved in that, it requires some somewhat different partners and somewhat different activities than we've had so far. In many ways, the era of the negotiation was a question around understanding what was possible and codifying it in language of an agreement. And we succeeded at an extraordinary level in Paris, and that success was in no small measure a function of our colleagues in Europe, I think working with us, leading in many places, but our colleagues from around the world who drove a high ambition vision that Paris represents. But it now takes a somewhat different community to implement that agreement. Very few of the negotiators in Paris had the portfolio of the energy minister. Very few of the portfolio members in Paris were the finance people. While there was an enormous parallel process underway in France which brought together cities and states and the private sector and civil society, very few of them were inside the room negotiating the text. And that's not really a surprise, but the question now is how do we bring those people into the process? Because that's where the majority of the change will have to occur. So I'd like to characterize for you three large-scale buckets into which the next phase of this process might be usefully put. The first one has to do with the negotiations and what remains to be done. There are a variety of rules that we have yet to adopt, details that have to be evaluated, procedures that will give precision and a great deal of ability to implement. What does that mean? It means the reporting framework, for example. It means the discussions on the transparency process. It includes some of the elements around technology. It frames some of the work given to committees on adaptation. This is a task that will complete the work that was not just begun in Paris, but fully underway, and requires additional specificity to make it operational. The second piece is the work that we've all committed to. That's the nationally determined contributions, the targets that countries have set for themselves. And under this part, what we need to think about is how to implement those. I think countries came into a different variety of ways to get to those targets, to get to those numbers. In some cases, they had a detailed plan already evaluated. They could move it forward. Europe, as a leader, had a program for emissions trading on which it could move forward. Others had somewhat less specificity. We need to think about how we support them. We need to think about how we can turn those large-scale visions into concrete action. And that requires a collective effort from all of us who bring technical materials to the table. All of us who bring history and experience to the table need to share that and make that a clear win. If we cannot deliver on the NDCs to which we have committed, we will undermine the effectiveness of the deal. And we need to deliver that beginning immediately. We can't wait until 2020 or 2025 or 2030 to begin that process. The inertia of all of our systems demands a more immediate response. And then I'd like to turn to the third piece, because it's quite clear that Paris gave us a clear next step, but it didn't give us the final outcomes that we need, which are to drive to the ambition of 2 degrees and an effort even to 1.5 degrees. And the next step there is also in the Paris Agreement, but it's left quite open. And those are mid-century strategies. How do you think about getting to a much more aggressive reduction going forward and yield the outcome that we seek, which is a solution to the climate problem, not just this next difficult, but next intermediate step? On that basis, the United States, actually working in this case with Canada, has agreed to do our own first mid-century strategy by the end of the year. And so for me, that's a clear indication, not of the final outcome. We won't resolve a 50-year horizon immediately, but we will begin to set the path in this direction. And the Europeans have also been doing the same kind of work. I've had discussions with my colleagues in Europe, in Germany in particular, but others as well. There's an ongoing task now underway, and there's an enormous window of opportunity to share our thinking about these processes. All of this is going to require outside engagement. And I want to conclude my remarks with 2 comments on this. At the moment, as we think about the resources made available by governments, they are fairly modest in comparison with the required investment that we will need to change our energy infrastructure, to change our land use and forestry programs. That will come from the private sector. The International Energy Agency has numbers on the order of $30 trillion in investment expected in the energy system over the next 25 or 30 years. 30 trillion. That's an extraordinary number. We have put forward an enormous effort on the part of governments, and it will be in the 100 billion or 100 billion plus range. The difference is, what do you do to catalyze that 30 trillion with the 100 billion? And here is where I share the minister's optimism. I just came back from a trip to California. I had preceded that in the week after the signing in meetings in New York with the finance community. We are now investing more heavily in renewables than in conventional fossil fuel. That's the shift we have to promote. How do we catalyze the next level of investment? What are we doing to bring down the risk of the investment in developing countries? How do we imagine the frameworks that are required in the regulatory horizon to make that happen? And how do we put all of the pieces together in a financial framework to make that real and compelling for the investment community on an equal footing, and in fact a better footing than the conventional systems? That's the task that we've got. And that's going to be married with a whole series of other events. It'll be married with the Montreal Protocol. It'll be married with ICAO. It'll be married with the IMO, these maritime and civil aviation and HFC discussions, all of which will contribute in a significant way to the near term, the medium term, and the long term. And that's the task before us. I look forward to working with my colleagues in Europe, with all of you, with my colleagues on the Hill, as we try to move all of this forward. Thank you so much.